Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born on August 18, 1890, to his parents Sarah Susan Phillips and Winfield Scott Lovecraft in his family home in Providence, Rhode Island. When he was just 2, he started citing poetry. When he was 3, he started reading, and by the time he was 5, he had read his full-length book called Arabian Nights. When H.P. Lovecraft was around the age of 6 or 7, that is when he started writing his own short stories and novels. Some of his biggest inspirations were Greek mythology, science, astronomy, and his grandfather, who sparked his interest in the weird and gothic. Growing up, he often suffered from loneliness and frequent illnesses, many of which were psychological. In the summer of 1917, Lovecraft wrote The Tomb and Dagon, and continued to write fiction until 1922. Eventually, he returned to Providence on April 17, 1926. However, this time not to bury himself away like he did in 1908. He traveled all along the eastern seaboard, and this is where he wrote his greatest fictions, The Call of Cthulhu, At the Mountains of Madness, and The Shadow Out of Time. He later settled in New England, where he found his niche to write weird fiction. His final 2 to 3 years of life were filled with tragedy. First, in 1932, when his beloved aunt Mrs. Clark died. Secondly, all of his later lengthy stories became hard to sell because of how complex they were. He then had to resort to ghostwriting in order to make a living. Thirdly, one of his closest friends committed suicide. This greatly confused and saddened him. Lastly, H.P. Lovecraft contracted intestinal cancer. By the time he decided to get it treated, it had already spread throughout his body. During his final days, he believed all his works to be failures, as he had never published an official book. However, thinking of all the friends he made along the way helped keep him in a good spirit. He then died on March 10, 1937, at the Brown Memorial Hospital at the age of 46. He never got to see how much his stories affected people. H.P. Lovecraft is best known for creating Cthulhu and the Great Old Ones, Azathoth, Yig, and Yog-Sothoth. Lovecraft never meant for humans to be able to pronounce the name Cthulhu. His timeline for events takes place over billions upon billions of years. The creatures he invented are way above human comprehension. One mere sight of them is enough to cause a person to go insane and die. A lot of his stories were open-ended so that other creators could fill in the gaps with their own stories. Today, he is known for his fantastic and macabre short stories and novels, and is considered the father of cosmic horror. Humanity is considered to be worthless and just a tiny ignorant species in the vastness of space compared to some other ancient creatures. Most of his stories take place in the fictional city called Arkham. This city is what inspired Arkham City and Arkham Asylum in the Batman series. His most famous creature, Cthulhu, has also made many cameos across pop culture. There have also been a large number of writers that have been influenced by his writing, spawning multiple spin-offs off of the Cthulhu mythos. The famous heavy metal band Metallica also made a song called The Call of Cthulhu as part of their album Ride the Lightning. This obviously has direct correlation to H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu. There have been many more influences in the music industry as seen by this list. H.P. Lovecraft is also known for creating the Necronomicon, or Book of the Dead as it is commonly referred. Lovecraft never explained the contents of this book and said whoever read it would be disappointed. The Necronomicon has also made a big appearance in the movie series The Evil Dead. Video games have also taken huge inspiration from his novels. For example, the game Bloodborne has a lot of its lore centered around cosmic horror and ancient intellectual beings. Some of this game's enemies look very tentacly and very H.P. Lovecraft-like. One example is the Brain Sucker. Another is the Winter Lantern. A boss called the Amygdala is also a good example. Additionally, the amygdala is a real part of the human brain believed to generate fear. The Orphan of Kos is another boss that represents a creature in Lovecraft's world. It fights with a weapon that looks like a shrimp and transforms into a weird flying creature halfway through the fight. One last boss in particular that really uses these features is Ebrietas. She flies around and has many tentacles. Her face also opens up as an attack sometimes. There's also a video game literally called Cthulhu, which is actually quite good. Another game that took major inspiration is Call of Duty Black Ops 3, the Zombies mode to be specific. There are creatures called margwas, which look very similar to Cthulhu. There are also squid statues, flying tentacle bugs, a giant squid as part of the main Easter egg, a squid gun that shoots black holes, squids in jars, tentacle balls that are on fire, and giant flying tentacle monsters. You can even occasionally play as a squid monster called the Beast. There have also been many tabletop games created around Cthulhu, such as Cthulhu Wars, which actually looks quite fun to play. Many other board games such as Monopoly and Yahtzee have had Cthulhu versions as well. Aside from all of this, there is also a CthulhuCon and H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival. These occur every October. H.R. Geiger, who is one of the most popular sci-fi horror artists of all time, was greatly inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's work. His art is very tubular looking and literally kind of makes your skin crawl just by looking at it. Geiger is famous for inventing the xenomorph, which appears in the Alien franchise. Other artists such as Guillermo del Toro, who did art direction for Pan's Labyrinth and Pacific Rim, Mike Mignola, who did art direction for the comic book Hellboy, have also been inspired by H.P. Lovecraft for creating iconic creatures. Outside of the movie genre, a large number of artists have also been inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's work. Some of the most well-known include Bob Eggleton, Ian Miller, J.K. Potter, Raymond Bayless, Rowena Morrill, and many others. It's hard to find anything nowadays that hasn't had some sort of inspiration from his stories. He has touched all areas of pop culture, including music, writing, art, movies, cartoons, video games, and his work can even be found on the side of buildings in our biggest cities in the form of graffiti and urban art forms. There are very few writers who have achieved this level of success, and I've been personally touched by his talent and imagination. It's a real tragedy that he never got to see how much of an influence he's had on society as a whole.